Good afternoon. It's Thursday, the 9th of April 2015, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host this afternoon, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio is Nick Green. And the weather outside, well, it's roughly blue skies and sunny. And most of the reports I've seen this morning for the rest of the UK also look pretty good. If you're suffering somewhere away from the sunshine, well, hang on in there because it should improve. Well, what better place to start with a little bit of blue sky than the seat of justice as boasted for the world. If you want freedom, democracy and justice, freedom from corruption, then you need to come to Britain. And in particular, you need to come to the High Court. So let's have a look at this little picture here. And of course, the text reminding us that in these very courts, a single judge sitting in a closed family court, Mrs. Justice Palfrey, claimed that the Hampstead child abuse was all nonsense. The claims about a satanic cult were dismissed. The statements of the two young children, 8 and 9, were dismissed. And she basically said that all of these claims were baseless, and that anybody who continued really to talk about them was evil and or foolish. Well, we think it's very interesting that a very brave lady called Nilu, who has been demonstrating outside of the church in Hampstead, the church which was implicated in the abuse, and of course the children mentioned this particular church in their testimony, but the demonstrations brought a number of people into conflict with the police. And in a remarkable turnaround, this lady, Nilu, was arrested, not in Hampstead, but outside Ecuador's London embassy 3 days ago, where there was, of course, a demonstration in support of Julian Assange. So quite remarkable. The police simply walked up to Nilu, said they were arresting her. She said, on what charge? Well, they couldn't really give her a charge, but they arrested her, they handcuffed her, they put her in a van, and they took her back to a police station. And indeed, she's appearing in court today. I haven't had a report before coming live, but she was appearing in court on a charge which is dating back to the 1860s and is to do with interfering with a priest. So quite remarkable that the Metropolitan Police, that seems unable to satisfactorily investigate child abuse in Dolphin Square, is unable to investigate abuse at Elm Guest House, is failing all of the child abuse victims that are coming forward. They were pretty hot off the mark in arresting this lady who has simply been peacefully protesting, not only in support of Mr. Assange, but also in support of the two Hampstead children that were abused. We'll continue to keep you updated on this, but it appears to be another sign of the clampdown by the British state on anybody who dares to try and protect children who are being abused. And perhaps we should also remind our viewers and listeners that Robert Greene, who's campaigned for many years to expose the horrible truth of abuse of children north of the border in Scotland, remains under a lifelong gagging order imposed by a single judge in a Scottish court. What is the gagging order designed to do? Presumably to protect the Scottish establishment from accusations that they're involved in child abuse. Well, let's move on to this subject, and that is the attack on Christianity. It's a subject which a number of people have been contacting the UK column, and we've watched with great interest. In our latest edition of the UK column newspaper, we put on the front page an article predicting that we would shortly be in an era where it would be unlawful to own a Bible, and we, with somewhat black humour, suggested that there would be an amnesty where you could hand in your Bibles or indeed dispose of them in recycling facilities. But here we've got an organisation, Christian Concern, one of many who have been talking about the Christian NHS worker who has now been effectively found guilty for basically praying for a Muslim. Well, in fact, he was giving a Christian book to a Muslim college, but there have been other cases of people praying for Muslims, and this now appears to be a criminal offence, or at least an offence where you are going to lose should it come to a tribunal. I would imagine that a judge sat in that particular tribunal. I just wonder what the religious persuasion of the judge was. Well, perhaps that would lead us on quite nicely to this key question: is David Cameron a Christian? And we will say very clearly that the UK column doesn't think so, and it now appears that many others are starting to come to the same conclusion. So a very interesting article here from the Archbishop Cranmer website. It says, "No Easter greeting to Christians" on the Number 10 website. And if we have a look at the actual text, this is an excerpt from the text. Very well written, very balanced, very measured article. But this is one of the key passages. "Funny, isn't it? The Number 10 website carries prominent and very prompt, if not advanced, greetings to Jews during Passover, Rosh Hashanah, and other holy festivals. And the Prime Minister never fails to wish Muslims well during Ramadan and Eid, both of them. There are effusive announcements about Vaisakha, if I've pronounced that correctly, apologies if not, and fulsome statements about Diwali to embrace Sikhs and Hindus, but nothing this year about for Christians. So simply lost from the Number 10 website. Well, UK column is not the slightest bit surprised about this. We have constantly warned about Mr. Cameron's connections. And of course, one of those connections was with this gentleman, his billionaire backer, Mr. Zabludovitz, a Finnish Israeli former arms dealer whose wife ran an art exhibition in the Midlands which featured Jesus with an erection. So we find it hard to understand how we can have a Christian Prime Minister who is supported by individuals such as this. We would also remind our viewers and listeners that the UK column highlighted that David Cameron, of course, had pledged undying loyalty not to the British people, but to Israel. This surely does raise some questions. We've also noted, and many people contacted us on this, that David Cameron suddenly decided that Jewish schools and synagogues should be given a 10 million a year sum of money to protect against anti-Semitic attacks. And whilst this may be money that is well spent, of course, many of the comments said, well, what is David Cameron actually doing to protect Christian members of society, many of whom are being bullied and intimidated through the very court systems, of course, that Mr. Cameron helps back and promote? Well, if that is the reality of what's going on in the country, perhaps the election is to do with sheer propaganda and puppetry. And a few of the papers are beginning to get interesting on this subject, but there's a lot of very poor quality articles. We think this is deliberate, and the aim is to simply put off the public from voting. The aim is to produce a hung parliament where a multi-party coalition can be created. And the UK column has been calling this the Rainbow Coalition. But here's the Telegraph: general election live, backstabber Ed Miliband accused of trading Trident for power in deal with the SNP. So a subject, the nuclear deterrent, which has hardly been mentioned in the press over recent years, has now suddenly been dragged to the fore in order to help wind up an election debate. And of course, we've got the lady in red, Miss Sturgeon. She says that if she can get near Westminster, she can take control with the help of the Labour Party. But the Express here saying, well, actually, a poll has revealed that the EU is a bigger issue for the Scots than independence. So quite an interesting article there. Is there some truth in it? Well, reports from north of the border we've been receiving would suggest so, but we will certainly have a discussion on that with David Scott when he gives us his northern exposure report on UK Column News tomorrow. So back to David Cameron. Is he the Prime Minister at the moment? Well, we're not too sure because, of course, we don't have any politicians working in the lead up to the election. And a key question we're going to be asking is who is actually running the country? But let's have a look at him because, of course, it's time for getting out kissing babies and making a fuss of young children. So the Express headline, this was one picture in quite a long article. So the Express here reporting that David Cameron has said no more votes on Scottish independence. How we can say that, is he actually in power or not, we don't know. But we were fascinated by the rather frightened look on the little girl's face. We put our listening devices into the room, and this is what we heard. The little girl said, "Mummy, mummy, please don't let this man touch me." Meanwhile, David Cameron was talking to one of his other MPs. What a nice little bundle of profit. She should make UK PLC at least $1 million. What do the banks say, George? Work her till she drops. Well, we may not be exactly spot on with that, but we think this is essentially what the Lib Lab Con is about. Full support for the corrupt and criminal international banks, allowing them to drag Britain into a massive debt situation. And of course, the rest of the public can be worked literally until they drop in order to pay off a debt of money created from nothing. It's fraud. David Cameron and George Osborne know this, but it's going to take many people to start banging the table to get that truth to the surface. Well, it gets worse because this picture would tend to indicate that Cameron has actually got his tie off to do some recruiting, some electioneering. But the Mail says here, phony election, bogus rallies, photo stunts, vacuous sound bites. And this is the meat of their article, that what you thought was David Cameron out speaking to people on the streets was simply filmed inside what looks like a deserted chicken house. Well, it's lies, it's stunts, it's deceiving the public, and of course it's applied behavioural psychology. What's the reality? Well, here we are. The Prime Minister is apparently promised 16,000 apprenticeships. Where are these wonderful jobs going to be? Well, Costa Coffee and Morrison's have signed up to train thousands of youngsters by 2020. So we just want to say, here we are, election 2015, for more zero-hour shelf-stacking jobs, vote Conservative. You know it makes sense. I'll pause at that point and allow you to think a little bit about it. As we are constantly saying, the evidence is in front of our eyes. What we need is for people to be active, getting out there, warning other people, and pulling apart this sheer corrupt government organisation, which is now dragging Britain into a very dangerous position. So who is running the country? Well, we'd like to thank the very brave lady that contacted us and pointed us at an organisation called Civil Service Live. And we didn't really expect where that would lead, but we're back to shelf stacking. Let's have a look at how that goes. Well, here we are. This is an old article from the Sunday Times, and it's giving a glowing report to David Sainsbury, the man at the top of the Sainsbury's empire. And he's apparently only on the planet for good. He's finding it really hard to give away £1 billion. And he's out to do the best he can. So we're just going to say, from supermarkets to Westminster, who's really running Britain? Well, let's chop to the Institute of Government. This looks like a reliable organisation. What's it got to say? It says it's an independent charity working to increase government effectiveness. Of course, we're seeing the government being more effective in all areas at the moment. NHS, schools, military, roads, everything is improving. So the Institute for Government obviously doing a good job. And it says that we're working with all the main political parties at Westminster and with senior civil servants in Whitehall. We provide evidence-based advice that draws on the best practice from around the world. And there we are. Well, let's just highlight that. We work with all the main political parties, but this is, of course, an independent organisation. Well, have a look at the left-hand side, because down the bottom it says we have cross-party governance and are funded by the Gatsby Charitable Foundation. Well, who are they? Let's add a bit in. Here we go. The majority of the Institute for Government's fundings comes from the Gatsby Charitable Foundation, which, oh dear, happens to be one of the Sainsbury family charitable trusts. And in 2013-14, the Institute received a core grant of 3.3 million from Gatsby. Well, that looks promising. So the Institute of Government, which says it's independent, has actually got the Sainsbury family at the heart of it. And indeed, their board members include none other than Lord Sainsbury of Turville. So far from being independent, we've got the supermarkets deep into government, advising them on all manner of policy. But it gets better. Let's have a look at where we go on this diagram, because we can jump from the Institute of Government to connections with Dodds Group PLC. And if I just bring it on the other side, here we've got Civil Service Live. Now, Civil Service Live is part of the civil service. It's part of the Cabinet Office, but in partnership with a private company, Dodds Group. And they are linked into Westminster Explained, who are in turn linked into the whole training of the civil service learning. And they're also linked in to Capita and their learning and development arm. So once we dig deeper, we start to see that we are not actually dealing with the civil service as we remember, where these people were here for the benefit of the whole of society. What we see is that the organisation has been subverted, we would say, with a small s, to bring in corporate interests. Well, here's one of the key people from Dodds, Guy Cleaver, the chief executive. What's he got to say? Well, he says that our training business, Westminster Explained, is a key partner to civil service learning and Capita learning and development, delivering the curriculum for the government policy profession. Increasingly, we're receiving commissions from government clients internationally. So we think policy is coming out of Westminster following debate by democratically elected politicians. But once we start to lift the lid, we can see that what's really happening is the government is now being controlled by very, very powerful corporate interests who are masquerading as independent charities. Well, what better person to bring on screen next than Francis Maude, of course, the transparency guru for David Cameron's Conservative Party. Not a pretty sight, but here he is. And why are we interested in Francis Maude? Well, he some time ago recruited a gentleman called Mike Bracken to become the Cabinet Office Director of Digital. This is a little statement from Mr. Bracken. He says, in 2011, early in my current role, I discussed with the Minister for the Cabinet Office, Francis Maude, the strategy I recommended we adopt for all things digital. The strategy was to be disarmingly simple to deliver. So we have Francis Maude recruiting an individual. The public has no idea who this man is or what his values are, but let's see how that develops. Because Mr. Bracken has been writing on government as a platform. Platforms can be opened up to, allowing third parties to use government data. And it gets better. There's a very small picture of Mr. Bracken speaking there, onwards. As some of you might have seen earlier in the week, I've just been appointed as the government's first Chief Data Officer. And we need to align our efforts so that we're as effective as possible in using public data for the benefits of citizens and businesses. So what we have going on here is that our data is being used by an individual who has come nowhere near the democratic system but he's working on helping businesses benefit from our personal data. And this, of course, has all been put together by Francis Maude, who boasts that he is the Minister for Fair Play and Transparency inside the Conservative Party. Well, it gets better, because have a look at this little organisation. It's the Government Innovation Group. So the Cabinet Office recently announced, it was not today, recently announced the appointment of Helen Stevenson and Paul Maltby as joint directors of the Government Innovation Group. Why do we need to be aware of these people? Well, let's have a look at them. Here he is. This is Mr. Maltby. As Director of Open Data and Government, Paul will lead teams in the Government Innovation Group responsible for open data, open policy making and analysis and insight. He will also oversee the Cabinet Office interest in the spin-out of the Behavioural Insights team known as the Nudge Unit. So here we are getting a nice mix of the use of data together with the use of applied behavioural psychology to get the public to do what the government wants. And we better bring in the lady. Here she is, Helen, formerly Director of Programmes in the Office for Civil Society. She was responsible for the leadership and oversight of all programmes, performance and finance. And prior to this, she led the team setting up Big Society Capital and was responsible for running several of the Office for Civil Society investment programmes. So these are just an example of the people now buried into the civil service. Their interests are nothing to do with the benefit of the nation. These people are working common purpose leadership schemes. They're knitting together IT across government, not for our benefit, but for the benefit of big businesses. Where does it lead unless we stop what's happening? Well, thank you again to a viewer who sent us in this. It's a document which we will say we believe is a real document, and it's a cooperation agreement between the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization and Microsoft. You can Google for this document and you will see that the UN has now decided in education in particular it's going to team up with this global monstrosity, but don't worry, it's all for our personal benefit. So, government compromised. How do we know that government in Britain is failing? Well, of course, let's look at the abuse of children. And some headlines caught our attention. We've got the Express here, Rotherham police officer charged with possessing child pornography. And our statement on this is another policeman picked up, but there's still no progress in the investigations into the Westminster child abuse rings. So if you're a celebrity, you can be picked up, you can go through the court process, you can end up in prison. If you're a police officer, the same. But if you're a politician or if you're a member of the establishment of Westminster, you're protected. Well, this was part of a BBC report on child abuse, child sexual abuse, torture and murder. They were featuring Operation Midland. But our comment, of course, is that the BBC has still not done any proper investigative reporting on child abuse at all. Indeed, there's reports that have come to light over the last couple of days that the BBC is busy boasting that it's about to unleash some docudramas into child abuse. And of course, these very dangerous programmes allow truth to be mixed with creative fiction in order to completely undermine the public's perception of what is real and true and what is false and what is propaganda. But of course, BBC specialising in that, so we shouldn't expect anything more. Can I cheer you up at the end of today's UK column news? Well, I hope so. You might like to visit this very bright website, bentlawyersandcops.com, where there are some extremely interesting lists of people who've been involved in criminal activity, corruption, abuse, child abuse, not only in the police service, but also through the courts. a good source of information. Please do check the original sources, obviously, before repeating what you find on this website. Well, what's been happening in Nottingham? Apparently, the police have opened up a second abuse inquiry. This is now featuring 10 more care homes and residential centres, and these investigations are going to go back 70 years. So while child abuse victim and whistleblower Melanie Shaw remains in solitary confinement in David Cameron's Sodexo profit-making prison, it appears that the police are now going to blur all of their investigation in Nottingham by spreading it back 70 years. And I think a little bit of common sense would tell us that in a 70-year timescale, this inquiry could drag on itself for 70 years, and of course no truth comes to the surface. So if we want to get our country back, which is a comment many people, or a question many people ask, how do we do this? UK Column says get the truth out about what's really happening in the country. If we are being governed by members of all three parties who are prepared to cover up the abuse of children, we can, of course, not trust them on any subject they put forward in their election campaigning. This needs to be exposed. Thank you for joining me today. UK Column News will be back tomorrow at 1 o'clock and should be joined by David Scott with his Northern Exposure Report from Life in Scotland. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.